I'm happy to be here today to talk about something that I've worked in for many years, and I'm excited to share with you some of the things that I have learned about driving and aging. So that's really our topic today. A little bit about my history. I am an occupational therapist, but I'm also a certified driver rehab specialist. So that is someone who has extensively studied the science behind what we call in occupational therapy, the occupation of driving. So you'll hear me reference that as we go today. Sure, this is. Okay, so here is just an example of an individual that, as you can see, he's on the spectrum of aging, and he had a stroke. He's allowed me to use his picture, and he was in our program, and because of his stroke, had some impairments that prevented him from working, and he is a transportation specialist and provides transportation for children who have special needs. So this is just an example of an outcome, a positive outcome of someone who experienced a change in his health, but who also was dealing with the process of aging and how important it was to him to be able to drive not only for his independence, but also for his vocation. So today we're going to talk about the link between driving and occupation. And in occupational therapy, we consider occupation something that's meaningful and purposeful to us. And I think many of you who drive probably would agree that having that ability carries a lot of meaning and purpose for us, because it allows us to be independent in getting around in our communities. And we're also going to talk a little bit about what we know about occupation and aging, and specifically driving and aging. So I was asked to really focus on the positive, and I'm not here today to talk about the statistics about aging and driving, but more about how being involved in a driver rehab program can help people, and continuing to drive in and of itself can keep a person's brain more active and engaged. And so that's part of what we'll talk about. And then we'll talk about recommendations for the aging driver. So cognition. Many of the referrals that I get from physicians, we get referrals from lots of different sources, but oftentimes it's an individual who might be aging, and the physician sends them to us for an evaluation. And the individual feels like they're functioning pretty well, but maybe they failed a screening, or maybe the family or they have expressed some concerns about their own safety. It could be someone who was involved in a motor vehicle accident, could be someone who had a change in their health, or has multiple health conditions, or changes in their vision. So oftentimes we might get an order for someone that says mild cognitive impairment. So we're not talking about individuals who have progressive dementia and Alzheimer's. Most typically, it's someone who is beginning to show signs of aging with their cognition. So what do we mean by cognition? Cognition refers to our ability to pay attention, our ability to remember information, executive functions, which include planning ahead, monitoring our performance, making changes to how we're doing based on our performance. And then lastly, the speed at which we process information. And we all know that people refer to some older drivers as being Sunday drivers or slow. And the reason why we tend to drive more slowly when we're older is because our brain begins to process information more slowly. So it's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing as long as it's not too delayed. But we're going to talk about that today. So our thinking skills are critical to driving, and oftentimes as people age, that's one of the first things they might notice is some changes in their thinking skills. What we do know is that there are some things that we can do to protect our brains, and I'm sure all of you just being here and listening to the discussions that you've been having are aware of the fact that there's some things that we can do to keep our brains more healthy. And there are certain things that we can't change. So the things that we can't change that are what we call passive things are our genetics. So we may be genetically predisposed to certain conditions, and one of those might be dementia. We also have an IQ level, and there is some relationship between a person's IQ level and their level of function as they age. So those are things we can't do anything about. They're not modifiable. Some of the things that we can do something about, though, are education level, our work experience, our physical exercise, our involvement in social and leisure activities, such as this. This is a social activity. It's also a learning activity. So because you're here, I feel you already know the value of getting out and getting involved in social things and doing something outside of the home just to get out, get some exercise, and spend some time enjoying each other's company and maybe learning. And that's what we know stimulates the brain. And the more of that stimulation the brain gets, the longer the brain continues to function for us. So we have found that individuals who we have worked with, who have early dementia, can make great gains when you challenge their skill level. And that's something that is exciting to know. I remember back in the days of rehabilitation where we thought that that process of aging, there was nothing you could do about it. It was not modifiable. And we also felt that way about things like stroke and brain injury. You know, there wasn't a lot you could do after a period of what we called spontaneous recovery, where the brain would just heal itself. We now know that that's not true. We can target certain skills and we can improve those skills. And the very act of engaging in an activity can prevent those skills from declining. So where we're going with this is, if we have some limitations in a particular or certain skill that's required for driving, we can target those skills. And if we have those skills, we can keep them sharp by continuing to do those things like driving. Driving in and of itself keeps us healthy because not only does it challenge us, but it allows us the independence to get out and do all of the things that we know are good for us, physically, cognitively, socially, mental health-wise. So it becomes important. So I'm not going to go over the literature today, but we do know that 1 day of participation in cognitive activities like this keeps a person from the probability of becoming demented. So if it's a genetic thing, we can't prevent that, but this is something that we do have some control over. So the same holds true in regular participation in things. Well, it can improve our memory, our decision-making skills, and our processing speed, and that's been proven in the literature. So programming, things like physical activity, social participation, what we call in occupational therapy, independent activities of daily living, which is your home management skills, driving, getting out in the community and doing things, taking care of your home, both exterior and interior, those types of things. And wellness programs can keep us more engaged. So they refer to these environments as enriched environments. So the more stimulation the environment provides, the better off we are. So if you have a mix of things that involve some social, some leisure, some physical, some cognitive, that's all good stuff for the aging brain. That keeps the brain active and engaged. Okay. So how do we know that this actually works? Well, I've spent a lot of my career in neurorehabilitation. And what's really exciting is we now know that we can develop new neuronal growth by things that we engage in. So when we're involved in things that we find particularly satisfying and challenging, and where we're learning new information, that's when our brain is most reactive. And compared to perhaps someone that is not out doing those things and is doing something more maybe passive, where maybe they're taking in a lot of stimulation, but they're not actively involved in doing anything themselves, that's where it can make a big difference. So we're talking about improving not only our overall health, and we're talking about our physical health, our mental health, and our cognitive health. And I think we all know that we feel better when we're able to do things that are important to us and that we feel like have really helped us in some way, whether it's get stronger, improve our balance, make us more mentally sharp, introduce us to other people, so that we consider ourselves part of a community or someone who has friends. And that's all part of our role, who we are and what's important to us. So driving is very involved in that, and I think we've said that quite a bit here. So it can help decline the likelihood of advancing dementia. So it's a protective factor, and I like that word. It can protect us against the advanced process of aging. It can't prevent aging, but it can give us more opportunity to enjoy being healthier longer. So here's an example of a woman in our driving program. She had a stroke, and so she's someone that driving for her was very important. So as you can see, the average age of many of the individuals I work with are the aging drivers. So a lot of people I talk with really associate the ability to drive and the independence that it gets them with their quality of life. And we know that, we talked about that, the principles of neuroplasticity, to simplify it, there's 10. And I like to go over these because I think it helps us understand what are we talking about here when we say it stimulates the neurons. There are 10 principles, and they're fairly easy to understand, and that's why I like them. And I oftentimes refer to these when I'm talking to older drivers about how driver rehab might be able to help them. The first one is use it or lose it. We've all heard that. It's very common, but it's very true. Once we stop using certain skills, those skills have a tendency to degrade or decline. So we don't want to stop using those skills. We want to keep using those. And if we use our skills, we have the potential to make those skills better. So that's how we can get better at something. We all know this from playing golf or playing chess or whatever it is we like to do. If we practice, we get better. Specificity. This becomes very important to driving because that means being very specific. Targeting certain things. We all may struggle with different things. Not everybody's brain functions the same. And so what we like to do in driver rehab is that someone feels like maybe they're beginning to note some changes in their driving performance and they would like to have an evaluation. We look specifically at those driver performance skills that you need in order to drive. So it is very specific and very intentional. Because what we don't want to do, especially in this day and age of healthcare, which driver rehab fortunately is covered by insurance companies, but because it's billed under occupational therapy, we don't want to spend anyone's time or our insurance coverage on working on skills that we don't need to work on. So driving involves a lot of different skills, and we're going to talk about that. So being specific. And if you don't know what it is you need to work on, it's hard to be specific in working on those skills. So you need to identify the skills. Repetition. We know that for something to stick, we can't just do it a few times. We have to repeat. In order to have staying power, we have to continue to work on the skills. And I've had drivers tell me after a stroke or something like that, the longer they've gone without driving, the more foreign driving actually feels to them. So that's just an example. Intensity. So we start out where a person's at and we begin to grade the complexity. So if you give someone things, and I'm speaking of driving here, activities to do related to driving that are way beyond their capability, that's not going to help them. They're going to get very frustrated and they're probably going to get irritated and probably not want to continue to work on those skills. If we give people things that are too easy and that are not stimulating their brain, that's not going to help them either because we're working at the level that they're at or even below their level. So that one's important. Time. The longer time goes on after someone experiences a neurological impairment or neurological changes from aging, that those things are not addressed, the harder it becomes to address those things. So in other words, time is of the essence. The sooner we can get in there and start working on skill building, the more likely a person is to be able to hang on to that ability to continue to drive. So it's kind of targeting those skills that are starting to decline and really focusing on what are the problem areas. Salience. This is the one that occupational therapists love the most and what I love the most. Salience means what's most important to us, what's meaningful and purposeful to us. And what's interesting about the science of this is when we're doing something we just love, that is when our brain is, at its maximum function. That is when neurons are most stimulated. And some of you may know this. Have you ever just felt like you were on cloud nine when you were really with someone or doing something that you truly loved and you felt like you were accomplishing it? That's what this is all about. And I know a lot of people who've told me driving to them is like number one important. You know, they can live with a lot of things, but giving up that ability to drive is not one of the things that they're willing to give up if they don't have to. Age. Well, we're talking about aging here. We know that, yeah, there is a natural decline in our abilities as we age, but this is talking about slowing that process down. And we're talking about someone who has mild changes, not severe impairment. And then transference. Transference is a principle that we use, and I'll use the example of, we start out with a simulator that simulates driving. And our simulator is top of the line. We're very fortunate at Mercy to have it. Our foundation purchased it. And the simulator has 90 drives at 3 different levels. So it has a beginner level, an intermediate level, and an advanced level. And you can start the person out where they're at, and you can choose those specific drives that target the skills that they're struggling with. So then we move to the vehicle, which is much more, that's that transference. We're transferring their skills from a simulated drive to an on-road drive behind the wheel in a real car with someone with them who can take over if necessary. Then the next transference would be them then driving solo in their car without someone with them, without security measures built in. So that's what transference means. And our program's kind of built on that. We start out with simulations. Depending on how a person does, we may move right into the vehicle. Someone might graduate right then and there. Or we may say, you know what, you have a difficulty with this skill, we need to work on this, then go out on the road, see how you do, and maybe go back and forth. And then interference is basically when we begin to use what we call compensatory strategies. They can be very helpful, but they can also be harmful. So an example might be if a person has a stroke and rather than use the side that was affected, they just do everything with their sound side and they never really work on regaining their use of their hemiplegic side. That is a negative thing for them if they want to be able to use that side again. Okay, that's just an example of a negative compensation. It might be rather than trying to challenge themselves cognitively, they rely on someone else to do everything for them. That would be a negative compensation because if they don't challenge themselves, that cognitive skill is not going to come back. So interference is not a good thing if we're capable of regaining the skills ourselves. Now, we're not talking about strategy use because using strategies and being defensive drivers is a positive thing, and we encourage that and we teach that. And one of the things I will say about the aging driver is our visual field tends to shrink, all of us. So one example of a good strategy is teaching aggressive visual scanning, making sure that as we age, we're being more aggressive with our visual scanning skills. That's an example. Okay. So now we're going to watch a little video. You've heard me talk about the program. This will help you see a little bit more about it. So hopefully this will pull up and you can see it for yourself. I hope this is, if not, I can talk about it. No problem. That you. Can everyone hear me? I'm talking a little loud because I know some people have said they're hard of hearing. But okay, I don't want to scream.
My name is Lynne Chapman, and I'm the occupational therapist here at Mercy Health, and I'm responsible for the driving program. We see a majority of our patients with neurological impairment. And one of the striking features that I've come to realize is that many of our patients are getting much sooner and much quicker intervention through the mobile stroke unit and the
We're talking about stroke a little bit here because we're
interventional
radiologist aging as well.
Hospital. One of the pieces of equipment that we are fortunate enough to have is the vision screener. It's called the optic vision screener. The vision screener is a little bit different than what you might see at your typical Bureau of Motor Vehicles office. It looks at near and distant visual acuity for both each eye and both eyes together. It looks at depth perception, contrast sensitivity, glare sensitivity, color vision, peripheral field, and there's a special feature on this optic which evaluates the individual's knowledge of the various road signs. It's a very helpful screening tool to decide if the patient has significant visual impairments that would affect their ability to operate a motor vehicle.
And it's pretty close to what you find on the road. There's some things that people walking on a turn of the other, or walking out of the turn of the
Our driving simulator, and we were fortunate enough that the Mercy Health Foundation was able to purchase this for our program. This is a top-of-the-line simulator. Not many programs in the country have this caliber of simulator that's capable of looking at many different types of things. And I'll try and highlight a few of the most important things. One of the very first things we look at on the simulator is response speed for braking and stopping. And we get data from the simulator that lets us know where individuals are in terms of the norm and where they need to be in order to be considered safe. Simulator also has 90 different drives at 3 different levels. So the levels are the introductory level, which is for someone who has lower level skills, the moderate level, and the competitive drive level. So that's important because we're able to grade or structure the training to the person, and we can advance individuals from more simple types of things to more complex advanced kinds of things that's required for driving. Some of the things that the simulator looks at is lane positioning, speed control, use of turn signals, ability to execute turns, the ability to negotiate intersections safely. Hazard avoidance is a critical skill required for driving. It looks at visual attention for left and right visual fields, and it gives us a sense of visual processing speed. The driving simulator has some special equipment, much like the vehicle. It has hand controls, and it has a adaptation that allows us to use all kinds of different steering devices for individuals who may have difficulty with grip or weakness in their upper extremities. And from here, then we decide what are the skills that may need to be addressed prior to taking a person out on the road, or if the person is ready to go out on the road, or if the person just is not capable of even advancing to the road. So this is a critical component in screening, evaluation, and training.
The driving simulator here gave me the indication of what it's like to turn a wheel, push a brake, get my feet to move fast enough to go one to the other. Just making a right turn, looking both ways, and taking your time to do this.
After my stroke, I came through rehab, and we needed to do the simulator to start driving, to give me the confidence to get back out on the road, to get back to work, the independence of it. So the actual driving part was good. It gave me all the confidence I needed to be back on the road, to make sure no one was going to get hurt, none of my family was going to get hurt, and it was great. It was pretty amazing.
And this is our third component of our driving program. And last but not least is the vehicle. And a couple things I wanted to share about the vehicle. This vehicle was donated by York Automotive. They had a family member who was in need of a driving program, and they had a sensitivity to this area. So we were fortunate enough to have a vehicle that we were able to modify. So the modifications to the vehicle include hand controls for an individual who may not be able to operate a motor vehicle using their leg in the traditional way. It has a extended directional crossover for someone who can't signal, who's limited to using one hand for driving. We have different types of adaptive devices for steering, depending on the person's ability to grip. Probably 10 different devices to adapt the wheel for steering. And then I have a brake pedal that I have access to if I need it when we're out driving. And I have found that to be very helpful multiple times. So that's really, we work on car transfers. We make sure individuals are able to get their adaptive equipment in and out of the vehicle, and look at all the things that we evaluated out in the real task of driving. And we use the vehicle in different types of environments. I typically start out in the park, which is a quarter-mile down the road. We allow the individual to get accustomed to the car, adjust their mirrors, drive through the park at a slow speed, practice some maneuverability, and from there we go out onto a 2-lane road that has very little traffic, advance to a 2-lane road that has much more dense traffic, and then onto a 4-lane road that has much higher traffic. The needs of each individual in terms of the type of driving that they do, we kind of customize their plan of care accordingly. I always make sure we go into a busy parking lot, and we're fortunate enough here, we have multiple parking lots. We can practice maneuverability in and out of parking spaces. So we'd like to just summarize by saying that we are proud of our Mercy Health Growth Program. We're proud of our driving program. We appreciate the patients who come forward to share their stories relating to their care at Mercy Health. And especially thanking the foundation for the simulator that's being put to very good use. And it's a critical piece of the driving program, along with the Yark family for donating the vehicle to make this program possible.
That's it. Well, and then I also wanted to talk, if you still have enough endurance, we're pushing our cognitive health here. To talk a little bit about the evaluation process and then the intervention, and then we'll be wrapping it up here. So what we start out with is we look at medical history and medication, and then we also look at driving history. Some of the people that I work with were actually sent by the BMV or by the police department. So or by family who have concerns about their driving. Maybe they were involved in a motor vehicle accident. I actually did a presentation not too long ago to a coalition, and the police department's part of that. It has Lucas County Sheriff, the police department, Department of Public Safety, and I chose all the people that they sent to me. I wrote up many cases, just 3 cases of their medical history, what we did, and what their outcomes were. And I presented it back to them so that they would get a sense of whatever happened to those people that you sent to me. And all of them had very different stories, like they blew through a railroad crossing when the arms were down, or, you know, various things like that. So things that made the officers think this person might need some work. That was one. So then we look at vision. We talked about that already in the video. We look at thinking skills, which we've been talking a lot about today. And physical abilities, because as we've talked about, driving involves all systems. All systems are go with driving. That's why driving is so different than other activities. And it involves high speed. We're moving, other people are moving. So our simulator, which you saw, you heard me talk about the various things that it can work on. So for example, a driver may have a visual field deficit. So we would want to work on drives that would require that person to stop at stop signs, scan the visual field. We have certain drives that are designed just for that. And that's our car. And then behind the wheel, we look at, things non-traffic wise, how they, operate the vehicle, but also their visual skills, how they do with handling the vehicle, positioning the vehicle. And then lastly, those strategic skills. And sometimes it's those strategic skills that older drivers might be struggling with. So the things that I have found are most often affected with the aging driver are attention span, not memory. And it's funny, not haha funny, but it's interesting to note. Sometimes neurologists will send a patient to me and say they're having problems with their memory. And when you test them, it's not their memory, it's their attention span. And if you're not paying attention, the information never gets processed to get stored to pull back out. So it's oftentimes a matter of attention. So we really focus on that. We also look at processing speed. We talked about how the brain has a tendency to slow with aging. So what can we do to help speed things up? And then our vision. And, driving involves a lot of movement vision. So we work on that as well. We call it dynamic vision. And here's our guy who just loves his Mustang and he couldn't wait to come back and drive it and show us. He was driving. So, but this is the closing slide. And what's the purpose of all this? Well, it's not to get in a car and operate a vehicle. The purpose of this is to engage in those things that we like, to be able to go to the library, go to church, join in a class, be part of a group, volunteer, do some things that we enjoy doing, or social events that we see other people. So that's really the importance of driving.